Welcome to the Beyond Divorce, Embracing Change podcast. My name is Michael Flores, and I will be your host while we explore the complex journey of divorce with empathy, insight, and practical knowledge. Whether you're contemplating separation, in a divorce, or looking for support post-divorce, our episodes provide expert guidance, stories, and strategies to help you through every step of the process. We are actual therapists, helping clients who sit on our couches every day through their difficulties of divorce. You are not alone. Join us as we delve in and find solutions that give you hope again. We're glad you're here.
This podcast is not intended to replace legal or personal help. This podcast is for informational purposes only.
Well, good day to you, everyone, and thank you for being back here on Beyond Divorce, Embracing Change. I have the pleasure, after many, many months, and when I say many, I mean many months, of asking Dr. Charway to join us, and she has decided to do so, and we are just thrilled to have her on the show today. We're going to talk to you all about something extremely important. There seems to be a constant diagnosis that comes up, but most people will tell us what they're dealing with when they're dealing with their spouses. So their ex-spouse, narcissism, and borderline come up a lot. And right now, there's a trend where narcissism seems to be like the key. That's the key word now. So we used to have keywords like alienation, and now we're dealing with keywords like narcissism. And so I actually brought in Dr. Charway, who is a psychologist, who's going to talk to us about those things, and about narcissism, and borderline is another one that comes up pretty frequently. So I'm really glad to have her here. It's awesome to have you, Dr. Charway. I would love the listeners to learn just first off about you, who you are, what you do, all those alphabet soup things you have behind your title. Would you mind giving them a chance to hear about that?
Yes. Hello. My name is Dr. Charway. I am a licensed psychologist and also a licensed specialist in school psychology. I earned my Ph.D. in school and counseling psychology, which means that I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I decided to go to a path to do it all. And so on the school side, I have years of experience with testing, also did additional training to be able to perform neuropsychological evaluations. I also have extensive training in counseling, group therapy, individualized therapy, and different therapeutic orientations.
Oh my gosh. And I literally mean you literally can do it all in our field at this point, from the interviewing to the testing to the counseling. But it seems that what we've learned is you actually specialize most with testing. That's kind of your thing. Is that accurate?
Correct. Currently, I have put aside therapy and intervention, and I'm mostly testing, doing assessments in various different fields.
Yes, and I will tell you, so I got to give a little bit of the background story. I read 2 different psychological evaluations you had conducted on 2 very different populations. One was a juvenile kid that was in jail, and I was working on we were doing it was a board meeting, but we were talking about best ways and best approaches to help this young person who was struggling with juvenile behavior. And so they asked me to come in and kind of give some ideas on the best course. And your evaluation was part of what we were looking at to decide the best course of action for this kiddo. So I read that, was completely impressed by the way that you had approached the evaluation, the way you had written it up. And then I was working on a case where it was a family law case, and it was reunification between a dad and a daughter. And you had done an evaluation on this kid, and I read that report. And so within a week, I read 2 reports that I was so impressed by. And I remember it was your name on both of them. And so I had to figure out who you were. So I gave you a call. I don't know how many. It had to be over a decade ago.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was a while.
Well, I called you and we talked, and I had to meet you. And the next thing we know, you're doing psychologicals for the family courts. Family courts are appointing you to do psychologicals on individuals that the judges want psychologicals conducted on. And so how long have you been doing that now? Psychological testing for family court?
I want to say somewhere 2018 to 2019.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, 18 sounds about right. So was that 7 years?
Yeah.
Maybe more. I went 26, about 8. Oh my gosh. Well, that's awesome. And so I guess what I would say is I think you're the right person to talk about what comes up, what people say. And so here's an interesting question. How often are you diagnosing people with narcissism? How often is it really coming up?
Not often. Personality disorders are not is not diagnosed as much as some of the other disorders. They are rare. Some personality range from 1% to 3% of the population.
Right. So a personality disorder would fall under the category of narcissism and borderline. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Yeah. So you're saying personality disorders aren't as diagnosable as people think they are.
Yeah, they're not as commonly diagnosed. And part of that is because sometimes it's hard to gather enough data to support a conclusion of a personality disorder.
Wow. So how is data collected on, is there a way that that's done? Is there certain aspects that people need to, instead of just throwing out the word narcissism, right, or borderline, what do they need to be considering in that, just based on what you just said about how the diagnosis really works?
Definitely you have to consider that any personality disorder is pervasive pattern of behavior over time. So what that means is that it's not attributable to just one setting or one person. That this is their view of the world, and it impacts their functioning in different areas.
So you're saying a true personality disorder is always with them. It's everywhere in all aspects, whether their job, with their other family members, in their marriage, in their home, with their kids. Like it's them. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's a pervasive and chronic pattern that occurs over time.
Got it. So what do you, just want to ask your opinion, why is it that you think narcissism is such a big deal today? It comes up so often.
Well, trends happen sometimes in society.
So we're in a trend right now.
Possibly.
Okay.
In addition, when people get introduced to new ideas, or when people develop research or have ideas about it and go online and start talking about it, it's spread online, and sometimes we get this frenzy, this forensic, like, okay, now we have to this sounds like me. This sounds like my husband, or this sounds like my boyfriend. They must have narcissistic.
It's got to be that
disorder.
Exactly. It's got to be that. So, what do you maybe instead of saying what to look for, what should they stay away from when they really get into these labels and using things like narcissism or borderline? Borderline hasn't come up as often recently for me, but I feel like the narcissism comes up all the time. So I'm wondering what are things that they should stay away from when it comes to going in and saying, hey, my ex is a narcissist, or hey, my ex is borderline.
Well, if you're not qualified, they should stay away from diagnosing.
Yeah. First off, are you qualified? Yeah.
But if someone does have legitimate concerns that their spouse is exhibiting a pattern of behaviors indicative of a personality disorder, then they could ask for or request a psychological evaluation to confirm to confirm if that actually exists in that person.
And have you noticed that when people, so someone comes in, believes their ex is a narcissist, they get a court order, psych eval is conducted, you conduct a psych eval and say, yeah, they don't meet the criteria for narcissism or borderline. And then they argue with you that your findings must be inaccurate. They must have somehow, passed this test with, because they're so smart, they outsmarted you in some way. Do you see that happen often, or does that come up frequently?
Yes, I think people exhibit frustration when they do not get the results that they thought they want, or they thought they were going to get. Some people have assured or created this ideation in their head that this is what it is and this is what it has to be. But like I said, there are factors to consider, such as people sometimes exist on a spectrum. So it doesn't mean that they don't exhibit symptoms that could be associated with a personality disorder or a mood disorder. But then you have to look at the criterion of that disorder. Are they actually meeting the criterion for that disorder? Is this actually a pervasive and chronic problem that is existing in different settings and outside of this relationship? Does the person only exhibit those behaviors in this relationship?
Yeah, that's a heck of a point. All that has to be taken into consideration for you to come to a conclusion that it's diagnosable, which is, I think, probably the hardest part for most people, is because, like, well, I see these behaviors, so it must be this, right? Because perception is reality for a lot of people, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So here's the question. You made probably the best point that I think I learned in my undergrad, the word spectrum. And I'm only talking about the internet service, aren't we? But the word spectrum, right? Did you like how I put that in there? Yeah. Spectrum needs to be like, hey, we need to talk to you about using the word spectrum in your. But when you use the word spectrum, you're talking about it like it's not just a straight line, like it's in between these two places. So can you explain to the listeners, what does that mean when you say there are tendencies that you may see in a person on a spectrum? Like, explain what you mean by that.
So if we look at the characteristics or symptomology of something like narcissistic personality disorder, you have someone who may have a need for admiration. They may have grandiose ideas about themselves. They may have a lack of empathy. And so there's 9 criteria that has to be met. There's 9 criteria, and 5 of those 9 have to be met in order to qualify for narcissistic personality disorder.
5 of 9.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, and it has to be a chronic and pervasive pattern of behavior, and those attributes are seen in different settings and impact functioning.
Yep.
So when we talk about spectrum, you might have someone who may have, let's say, a need for admiration. They want their partner's attention all the time. They want to be praised for things they do or things that happened in the relationship, but may not necessarily expect that of others. They may not they may not have that. They may not meet those other criterion, and so the people will start to see when they when they read online or see people who talk about narcissism, like, yes, that right there is definitely that person. And maybe those others could fit, but not necessarily always fit perfectly. And then they'll overgeneralize and say, you know what, that person has narcissism.
How often do you suppose overgeneralization is actually happening?
I mean, I think that's hard to actually determine with numbers.
Right.
But I think that with the tendency for a lot of things that are now publicized in social media,
yes,
we get a lot more exposure.
I think that's what I'm trying to help the listeners understand is, like, I want them to be careful with the buzzwords, because they get in too deep with the Kool-Aid here. And then what happens is me as a therapist, I'm always looking to try to help build solutions, right? So when they're only looking at the factor of this is the problem and this is what it must be, they can't see that person any different. So even if let's do this. What is egocentrism?
Well, that's when things are centered around a person.
Yes. Yeah, about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
People are more likely to be egocentric versus narcissistic. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think
you can disagree with me. I'm off. That's what I'm asking.
No, not that I disagree. I think I don't know if they're more likely to, but I think that people sometimes get that confused and will.
There it is. Yeah.
Will sometimes attribute that to being narcissist.
And that's what I think. And so when they get into these buzzwords or they watch these videos, like you said, on social media, they're hearing egocentric behavior that they're saying is narcissistic, right? Mm-hmm. And so then you're talking about what you said earlier about the spectrum and going, you may see things that fit within the spectrum, within that area, that do look like narcissistic behavior, but that doesn't mean that they meet the criteria for narcissism. Mm. Yeah? Okay. I have a weird question to ask you that to help our listeners. It helps me too. Is there anything that you could point to in society to say, if you want to understand what a version or a type of narcissism looks like, think of this: a cartoon, character, maybe a movie, a person played a part. I don't know, just something you can say. That would be something I would say that might be narcissism, or that's close to it.
That's hard. I don't watch a lot of TV anymore.
Well, I'll give you one. I'll give you one. I think the movie was called Fatal Attraction.
Oh, that's what Michael Douglas.
Yes.
It's been so long.
Do you remember this? Okay. So
vaguely.
You had Michael Douglas, and I think it was Glenn Close, right?
Yeah.
And I told people, I said, I think that's a borderline. Glenn Close, I think, is playing a borderline. Would you agree?
I don't remember, but when I think of borderline, I mean, I don't know, narcissism, I'm drawing a blank, and I know I will get
That's
it.
okay. That's okay.
Amber Heard.
Oh, you're talking about Amber Heard meets the criteria for narcissism? Really?
No, for borderline.
Oh, for borderline.
For borderline. And I believe that's, don't quote me, but I believe that's what she was diagnosed. But when you follow that court trial, that very publicized Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard.
Yes.
I mean, and they describe those behaviors and details that push, pull.
Push, pull.
Yeah. That,
I love that.
That fear of abandonment. She, and like I said, of course, I'm not diagnosing her because I didn't do the actual
you
testing.
can't. No, and I don't want you to diagnose her. I just want something that says, hey, look, from the outside looking in, if I said I was on a point of something and say, hey, this might meet a criteria, but I'm not diagnosing. I'm just saying it looks like, borderline might look a little bit like what you might have saw with Amber Heard.
Absolutely.
Might. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get it. We're good. We can't do that. That looks like a tree out there. It might be a bush, but you get the idea. Yeah. So, no, I think a lot of times one of the greatest things that I got to experience as a student was when we were learning about schizophrenia. It was our professor showed us videos of a counselor treating someone who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So we got to see it. Like, we got to see the person in a schizophrenic state.
Yep.
And this guy thought he was the Pope of the church, right? And we got to watch him have this conversation about being the Pope. And it was like, I mean, we're watching it going, what? But I mean, this guy really believed he's the Pope. It was really cool. So to me, it was so helpful, because I was like, I have something to go back to and go, I remember seeing that and that looked like. And I think a lot of people like that. Like, what does that look like? So that might be, I think if you had someone, Kalima, here right now who was wanting to talk to you about these things, narcissism, borderline, I think that's exactly what they would ask you is, what does it look like? Are there any, you said there's 9 criteria. Are there anything that you would tell them and say, hey, look, if you see these things, this is when I would say you might want to consider requesting a psychological. But these are things I need you to go ahead and get out of your mind now, right? Because they're going to end up taking you down the wrong track.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you could help the listeners with something like that.
Well, I mean, would it help to kind of define and go into a little more what those disorders are?
Oh, I think that'd be great.
I think one, and I've said this several times, but I think that one of the things that needs to be stressed is that pervasive pattern. Pattern of behavior and personality attributes. And that's important because this is not, personality disorders differ from other disorders in that although they are treatable and there are evidence-based interventions to address them, it's not something that necessarily just can be alleviated completely.
Got it.
When you have a depression and you might get treatment and medications and your depression may be completely resolved. Your personality disorder is your view on life.
Ooh.
It's the perspective, it's the lens in which you see the world. And so while people may be with a clear lens, maybe with a personality disorder, your lens is pink. And so when and there's 10 different recognized personality disorders in the current DSM. The 2 ones that we're talking about today, narcissistic personality disorder, is characterized by this, like I said, need for admiration, a lack of empathy, grandiose ideas, preoccupations with beauty or fantasy, preoccupation of fantasies with beauty or power. And so
is the power like the win-lose?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So well, not just the win-lose. That's how it may manifest sometimes in divorce, right? They're gonna win at any cost, and that includes making it harder legally or filing additional court cases that may have no merit because there's fear of losing control.
Yep. I'm not going to lose. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I'm not going to
I don't lose. Exactly.
And then you have the borderline personality disorder, which is really a personality disorder that's characterized by instability. So, unstable mood, unstable interpersonal relationships, unstable self-identity. A lot of times, not all, but people with borderline personalities have significant trauma, history of trauma, and thus they develop things like this fear of abandonment. But, or I always call it the push-pull, right? So at any given time, or very black and white, at any given time, this person is all good. If you're giving me what I want and what I need, you are the best person that existed. I am so happy to have you in my life. But that next second, if you tell me no, if you tell me I don't, I can't do that for you today, all of a sudden you're villainized. You are the worst
if they sense rejection, basically.
Or just not, their needs not being met. They perceive that as, now you are the worst person.
Oh gosh.
There's
no middle.
You're awful.
There's no middle.
I mean, not often. They have very, that push pull. If you push, I'm gonna pull away. If you pull, I'm a push towards you.
Yeah, the push pull. Oh, I love that. That's a great way to remember that.
And then sometimes those can lead to things like, and when we talk about divorce and parenting, not always, but can lead to people with borderline personality parents can lead to things like false allegations sometimes.
Borderline parents are likely to do false allegations.
Well, it can lead to things like false allegations against the partner. This perceived, because they at some point they developed in their head that this person is all bad. And so, and if that person's all bad, they're bad for my children too.
Wow. I think they're gonna have to rewind, go back through that whole thing you just said. I mean, that was impressive. I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you went through that. So man, my brain's going 100 miles an hour. I'm trying to think of what I want to ask you next. I'm sitting here thinking, with what you just described about the narcissistic lens, right? And I like the way you used an analogy of like wearing a pair of like glasses, right? Like you're seeing the world in a certain way. That's what makes it so unique. So if you're not wearing sunglasses, right, you see different shades of color in the world. You put a pair of sunglasses on, the color changes. They're wearing these sunglasses and it's like that's their actual eyes. It's not like they're wearing glasses, but the world view is completely different for a narcissist, right? And then you talked about the borderline. So now what I'm wondering with personality features, because we have narcissism and borderline meeting a personality feature, are you born with these things? Or are these things developed as a result of experiences in your childhood, trauma, wounds? How are personality features developed?
Chicken and egg question.
Well, I'm asking it. This is my favorite thing we did in psychology, is always ask chicken and egg question.
I think, so according to research, the answer is that there is no conclusive evidence to support that this is primarily a genetic thing or primarily a nurture thing.
Okay.
But there are correlations with, genetics, like family members or, such as parents who have a narcissistic personality disorder. Is it statistically more likely that their child? Yes, it can be, but like I said, it's not conclusive to a point that says that this is purely a genetic problem. But then there's also correlations of nurture, like borderline personality disorder. There's a huge correlation associated with people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and have a significant history of trauma.
Yes, right. I've seen that. And so I think it's interesting because if one of your parents meets the criteria for narcissism or borderline, and you're being raised by that person, are you saying that there's a likelihood that you could become that as well because you're being raised by a person who actually exhibits those personality features?
I think it's more complicated than that. Not necessarily.
Oh, go ahead.
It depends on how we, people. There's so many factors to consider in that. One is things like resiliency, right?
Ooh,
Or having a resilient factor. Sometimes that's a person. Sometimes that's grandma. Sometimes that's a teacher who will help. Help to nurture that person so that way they don't necessarily exhibit those symptoms. So I think it's not as simple to say that my parent raised me like this and therefore I will be like this.
Yeah.
But I think that, like I said, it's just like with schizophrenia, right? Genetically it's increased, but it's not a guarantee. It doesn't mean you're going to develop schizophrenia.
Exactly. And I think something you said, the resiliency, in my opinion, when I've done therapy, is already what they're built with. Like you're building their resiliency, but they already have some of that. And so it's almost like an interruption of pattern, right? So like if a kid comes in to talk to me and let's say that one of their parents was diagnosed a narcissist, or let's say another parent might be diagnosed as borderline. And you're like, man, this kid's growing up in an environment where he's getting all kinds of stuff thrown at him. But I've seen kids walk out of that stuff and they're nothing like that, right? And it's like you said, it's all the things that were in between. It could have been a coach, it could have been a friend, it could have been a counselor.
Sometimes personality, the personality of that child.
Their own personality.
Correct.
Yeah, see, that's why I love our field, because there's no box. Like it's like everyone, for our brains, we want everything to fit in a box. Oh, they're narcissistic, they go in this box. They're borderline, they go in this box. But the way you're describing it is going, there are factors that look like they fit in that box, but there's so many things you haven't considered, right? You haven't considered the resiliency. You haven't considered environmental factors. You haven't considered their own psychological makeup, their own personality features, and how they may be able to overcome some of the things that may be presented to them in the world. And so now I go into it and say, if a parent believes that their ex meets one of these criteria, what's a good way for them to help their kid? Because they can't change what their ex is or what they think their ex is, but what should they be considering on how to help their own children or even help themselves manage their interactions with this person?
I would say one is, you like you said, you can't control others' environment. What you can is control your own environment. So creating a stable living condition in home for when that child comes to you is imperative. Also, creating open communication. And so when I say open communication, I want to, caution that open communication doesn't mean that you trauma dump on your own child.
Let's make sure we know what that means. Let's define that. See, but I'm glad you're doing that, Kalima, because I think if you don't define it, they can misinterpret what you mean.
Yeah.
So go through that. So that does not mean trauma dumping on your kid, which means you're telling your kid all your issues, right?
Yep.
Or let me go ahead and tell you about how our marriage was, kiddo. Let me tell you all about our marriage. Well, they're not married to your ex. Why do they need to know how your marriage?
Or purposely trying to portray your ex in a bad light, because then you get into things where you're trying to triangulate that kid or get them on your side.
And I bring up triangulation all the time, and we have a whole episode on that.
But open communication means that I'm going to answer. I will answer any of your questions that is reasonable in an objective way.
Ooh, yes.
Also, I'm creating a communication environment where you feel safe to talk to me.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that I'm always going to respond or encourage, but I'm going to allow you to talk.
So important. I think that creates a sense of security for children because kids have so many questions, and I think parents fear that if they don't answer those questions or they don't tell the kid the truth, that's what they always do. I'm going to quote that. If people could see me, they'd see me do quote fingers. But the kid deserves to know the truth about what happened. And I sit there and I think, how does it help the kid to know the trauma you experienced in your marriage? Right? Because then you either have to hate the parent that did this to you, or they have to become your protector because how sad that my parent went through this. And so now both are problematic, to hate one parent or to be your confidant to help you deal with what you've gone through. Not saying that parents don't go through that. I'm not sitting here penalizing parents for going, oh, it's your fault that you had trauma in your marriage. What I'm saying is trauma dumping. You don't have to take it to your kids. Your kids can't manage that stuff.
And
you're struggling managing it. Well, how could your kids do it?
And you have to think, is that person at a cognitive developmental stage where they can understand that that is just someone's perspective, and that there might be other things going on. And so when you're telling them these bad things about this person, can they distinguish that this may not be the whole story? And because children at that age often cannot. They personalize it. Some children wants to be that parent's savior. I'm going to protect you.
Yes.
And so they develop, hatred or animosity towards the other parent because they think that they have to save this person. And then you have effectively made yourself a victim.
Right. And then the other parent describes that as alienation from the other parent. And so you see all these. I think what I'm trying to help listeners understand is there's so many factors, and it's like us therapists and psychologists, we're helping put the puzzle together, but it's not always going to fit in the way that you see it. It doesn't always fit in your lens, in your world, because you're wearing glasses. Everyone's wearing a set of glasses and sees the world a certain way. And we, as clinicians, I won't say for counselors or psychologists, because y'all actually do testing, but when a clinician is making an inference on a situation, there is a level of bias that you have to consider. I mean, what was I was in a deposition, and that was the word they used is, Mr. Flores, how do you know it wasn't a confirmation bias? With that big word of, how do you know that you're not just seeing it the way you see it and you're just confirming your own belief? And I said, because I always have to assume I'm wrong. That's how I know I'm not in confirmation bias. It's like, why? Because I always assume I'm wrong until you keep showing me factors that tell me, you're not wrong no more. Would you like me to give you the things that I've seen over the course of time that tell me I'm not wrong? Now I can confirm exactly the conclusion I've given you. So yeah, you flirt with the assumptions, don't marry them. I mean, that's the old Dr. Ruth's Gita line that she gave me. Don't flirt with your assumptions, don't marry them. So I flirt all the time with assumptions, and I love it. That's how I can stay neutral. That's how I can be neutral. That's how I can be conclusive when it's time for me to be conclusive, so that I can be as helpful to you as possible. I'm going to tell you something. This was one of the coolest conversations because I learned a lot today. I took a ton of notes. I'm going to go over some of these things and clean them up. If I say them wrong, clean it up. But here's my notes. There are multiple factors that have to be met for a diagnosis, especially with personality disorders. Multiple factors. And you said specific to narcissism, like there's 9, but you have to meet 5. If you don't meet 5, there's no diagnosis there. You have to remember there's a spectrum. It's not a straight line. It's within think of 2 different lines. There's a high line and a low line, and somewhere in the middle would be the spectrum. Is that right?
Yeah, I will almost say that it's one line, right? And then on one side, you have a person with a personality disorder.
Yep.
Right? And then you have on that other side, and you can't see me, but this is in parentheses, a normal person. And then you have the people varying on different.
Yeah, it's a bell-shaped curve.
Yeah.
It's like a bell-shaped curve. Exactly. When we do it's exactly what that is. Okay. And then you'd mentioned pervasive patterns. That was the thing you wanted to hit home. There has to be a level of pervasive patterns. Is that right?
So across different settings, this is something that is chronic. This is chronic. This is how they view the world.
Right.
And so not in just this relationship is the only time they exhibit that behavior.
Got it. So I had another thing I wanted to ask you. I know we're getting close on time here. Can people be triggered into a personality feature that can be misread? Like, let me give you an example. You and I are in a great friendship, but is there something that could happen in our friendship that would trigger me to look like I'm narcissistic in some ways? When I'm not, I'm responding to stimuli.
Or I think people definitely can attribute symptoms. I think about it. There's people in the world who have a need for admiration, but may not meet all the other ones, all the criteria. Or maybe they have a need for admiration and they have preoccupation with fantasies, but it's only really, they only exhibit that in their career setting and job, and it's not other settings, and it doesn't happen all the time. It's exclusive to certain things. And so they're not necessarily, so they're on the spectrum.
On the spectrum. That's the new word everyone's going to be using. That's the new buzzword. They're on the spectrum.
They're on the
and I don't mean autism.
Or they exhibit some symptoms, so it's not uncommon, but it doesn't mean that they meet full criteria.
Got it. And one of the things I heard you say too is that borderline, you look for that push-pull. You'll see a lot of the push-pull in borderlines. Yeah. I love the way you said there are correlations between genetics and the way that they're nurtured. And so we don't actually have proof to say it's how they're born versus it's what they've experienced in life. There's actually correlates to both. And so we don't have conclusive evidence either way, chicken or egg, as you called it. The thing that you got to keep in mind is resiliency. When you're building and nurturing resiliency in a person, that's how you actually help them. Regardless of whether they're dealing with the narcissistic behaviors or borderlines, nurturing resiliency is the key to that. And then you mentioned having a stable environment that you create yourself for your children and keeping the open communication, which you said very well. I'm able to answer certain questions, not all, certain ones, but they're always in an objective way. Did I get that right?
Correct.
Gosh, that was awesome. My brain was going, I had to write all this down, my poor paper. That was wonderful. Well, Kalima, I can't thank you enough for being here. I love talking to you. I know that we have these conversations not on the podcast, and so it's just what a treat to actually have it where the listeners can gain the knowledge that you have done so much for us. And is there anything that I'm left out that you're like, there's one more thing, Michael, there's a couple more things.
There's 20,000 more things.
Oh, great. We got to do a part 2. Here we go. Yeah.
But no, for today, I thank you for having me.
Oh, Kalima, you're welcome to be a guest anytime you want. I'm thankful you did it after all these months. Listeners, what a treat. I'm so glad. I hope you loved this podcast. I am not opposed to you guys commenting or sending in questions or whatever you like to do because we learn more from hearing from you. We're trying to get you the information. And I want to thank you. We have found that there are just some listeners that have been listening to us since day one and just constantly listening in to the information. And all we want to do is get the information out to people to help them, give them some guidance. If you guys find that you're stuck somewhere in the process, seek out counseling. We'd love to help you. We're here to help if you need our help, or if we can give you some guidance on where to get the help, we're happy to do that as well. So we thank you. We love you guys so much, and keep moving forward, everyone. Until next time.